The 5-year rule is wrong. Not outdated, not nuanced, wrong. And if you're using it to decide whether to buy a house in 2026, you're using a calculator that hasn't been updated in 20 years. Welcome back to Money in the AI Era. Last week, we looked at whether $50,000 saved at 30 means you're behind. This week, we're tackling the second biggest question every person in their 30s is asking right now. Should I rent or should I buy? The advice you've heard is some version of the 5-year rule. Stay at least 5 years, and buying beats renting. Stay less, and you're better off renting. That rule is built on assumptions that no longer exist. Today, we're going to look at why, what the real number is in 2026, and one specific question you have to answer before any of this math matters. Let's start with the rule itself. The 5-year rule says when you buy a house, you pay roughly 2 to 5% in closing costs up front. Then when you sell, you pay another 6 to 8% to the real estate agents. That's a combined 8 to 13% of the home's value that disappears in transaction costs. The 5-year rule says you need at least 5 years of mortgage payments, equity buildup, and home appreciation to offset those costs. Stay less than 5 years, and you've lost money. Stay more, and buying starts to win. This rule was built in an era of 3 to 4% mortgage rates, predictable career paths, and steady home appreciation. Each of those three assumptions is now broken. Let's start with rates. As of June 2026, the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate is 6.52%, according to Freddie Mac. The Mortgage Bankers Association is forecasting rates to stay around 6.5% through 2028. For context, the rule was built when rates sat between 3 and 4%. Here's what that difference does to your math. On a $400,000 home with 20% down, your monthly principal and interest at 3% was about $1,350. At today's 6.52%, that same loan costs you about $2,030. That's $680 more per month going to interest, not equity. So what does that do to the break-even point? Zillow's most recent analysis shows the national break-even point is now 5.9 years with 5% down and 6.0 years with 20% down. The industry standard estimate across multiple sources is 5 years and 8 months. So the average is technically still close to 5 years, which sounds like the rule still works. Here's the problem. That's an average. In high-cost markets like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Boston, and most of the Northeast, the break-even point is now 7 to 10 years. That's not a small adjustment from 5. That's a fundamentally different commitment. But rates are only half the story. Because even if the math says you should stay 7 years to break even, that assumes one thing the old rule took for granted: that you'll actually still want to stay in that house, in that city, in that job for 7 years. Which brings us to the bigger problem. If you watched our first video, you know we talked about 3 career categories in the AI era: compounding, stable, and decaying. The 5-year rule, and even the new 5.9-year rule, doesn't account for which category you're in. Here's why that matters more than the interest rate. Through the first 5 months of 2026, U.S. employers announced 397,755 job cuts. The tech sector alone announced 52,050 cuts in just the first quarter, up 40% from the same period in 2025. Amazon led cumulative cuts at roughly 16,000 roles. Oracle announced 30,000 in a single late March action. But here's the more important number. Through May, artificial intelligence was cited in 87,714 of those layoffs. That's 22% of all job cuts in 2026. To put that in perspective, AI was cited in 54,836 cuts for the entire year of 2025. So, in just 5 months of 2026, AI-attributed layoffs have already surpassed all of last year by over 30,000. In May alone, AI was cited as the reason for 38,579 cuts. That's the highest monthly total ever recorded for AI as a layoff reason. and it accounted for 40% of all cuts that month. Here's the Andy Challenger quote that matters most. He's the Chief Revenue Officer at Challenger Gray and Christmas, the firm that tracks this data. In the May report, he said companies are restructuring aggressively as they reposition for an AI-driven economy. That's the key word, reposition. Companies aren't just cutting because AI replaced specific jobs. They're cutting because they're getting ready for an economy where the org chart looks fundamentally different. What does this mean for buying a house? It means the assumption that you'll stay in the same job, in the same city, for 7 years is a much riskier bet than it was even 5 years ago. If you're in a decaying career category, the probability that you'll need to move for a new job, change industries, or accept lower pay is meaningfully higher than the historical norm. Buying a house ties you to a location. A 30-year mortgage assumes 30 years of relatively stable career and earnings. The 5-year break-even assumes 5+ years of stability minimum. If your career category doesn't support that, the math doesn't work. Not because the numbers are wrong, but because you might not be able to fulfill the time commitment that makes them work. So here's the framework I want you to use instead of the 5-year rule. Before you ask how long you plan to stay, ask which career category you're in. If you're in a compounding career, senior roles where AI makes you more valuable, skilled trades, specialized professional services, then the standard math is fine. Your earnings are likely to grow, your location stability is high, and the 7-year break-even is realistic. If you're in a stable career, government, education, mid-career corporate, in slow-moving industries, the standard math also works. You can plan around it. Buy if the local break-even number makes sense for your specific market. If you're in a decaying career, entry-level knowledge work, customer support, junior creative or analytical roles, basic data work, buying is much riskier than the rule suggests. Not because the math is wrong, but because your ability to stay 7 years is lower than the math assumes. Renting in a decaying career isn't throwing money away. It's buying optionality. And optionality is the most valuable thing you can have when your industry is in transition. So here's what to actually do this month, regardless of which category you're in. Move 1. Calculate the real break-even point for your specific market. Don't use the national average. Use a calculator from Zillow or NerdWallet that takes your specific zip code, home price, and rent into account. Most people are shocked by how different their local number is from the 5-year rule. Move 2. Be honest about your career category. If you're not sure, look at the hiring trends in your industry over the past 12 months. Are companies in your field hiring more or less? Is your salary growing or flattening? Don't use 2019 trajectories to predict 2026 outcomes. Move 3. If you're leaning toward buying, run one specific test. Can you commit to staying in this house, in this city, for at least your local break-even plus 3 years? The plus 3 is your buffer for career disruption. If you can't honestly say yes to that, rent for 1 more year and reassess. So, back to the original question. Is the 5-year rule broken? By the math, yes. The real break-even is closer to 6 years on average and 7 to 10 in high-cost markets. By the framework that actually matters, yes, but for a bigger reason. The rule assumes you'll be able to stay. And in the AI era, your ability to stay is the variable nobody is talking about. Next week, we're breaking down the math on side income in 2026. Specifically, which side hustles are actually surviving the AI shift and which ones are quietly dying. If you want that, hit subscribe so you don't miss it. In the description below, every source I cited today is linked. Freddie Mac rate data, Zillow break-even analysis, the Challenger layoff report, and the Harvard Business Review survey. Check the work. See you next week.